The day I found out someone was walking around my office wearing my last name like a trophy, I was sitting in a cubicle that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. Not a corner office. Not executive glass. A gray fabric cube on the fourth floor of Summit Meridian's Dallas branch, Customer Retention Team B. I wasn't Evan Cole there. I was Evan Carter. Level 1 Retention Associate. $47,000 a year. Shared desk phone. Metrics posted publicly like a scoreboard of humiliation. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Because no one on that floor knew I was Richard Cole's only son. No one knew that Summit Meridian, the insurance logistics empire with offices in 12 states, would one day legally be mine. I came to Dallas to learn how the company actually worked. Not from board reports. Not from sanitized executive summaries. From the bottom. From the complaints. From the people who got screamed at by customers when systems failed. My father hated the idea. You'll be resented, he told me over a secure call the night before my first day. And if they know who you are, they'll perform for you. That's why they won't know, I said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he gave me one rule. If something turns dangerous, you handle it first. I will not step in unless it threatens the company or your life. I agreed. I thought I understood what that meant. I didn't. Because 3 months later, someone else walked into our branch claiming to be his son. And that's when the floor started to rot. Before any of that happened, there was Nate. Nate Brooks. He sat across from me, one desk over, always slightly hunched like he was apologizing for taking up space. Nate didn't know me as anything but a broke transplant from Ohio who drove a dented Corolla and packed peanut butter sandwiches. He told me about his sister on our second week. Stage 3 autoimmune disease. Insurance only covering half. Commissions delayed for 2 months because of processing backlogs. He laughed when he told me. Not because it was funny. Because if he stopped laughing, he might start breaking. One Friday, I noticed he didn't scan his badge for lunch. He just sat there. You're not eating? I asked. Intermittent fasting, he said. His stomach growled loud enough for both of us. That night, I quietly transferred enough to cover his bus pass through a prepaid card and left it in his locker with a fake transport reimbursement note. The next week, groceries showed up at his apartment, anonymously paid. He tried to find out who did it. He never suspected me, and that mattered. Because I needed at least one person in that building who saw me as ordinary. Not as a future CEO. Just as Evan. The guy who stayed late to help clear backlogged cases. The guy who covered calls when someone had a sick kid. The guy who never mentioned that he understood the internal systems better than most mid-level managers, because I'd grown up listening to boardroom strategy over dinner. Life on that floor was simple. Metrics. Coffee. Shared complaints. Until the rumor started. It began as a whisper near the printers. Corporate sending someone. Big someone. CEO's son. I kept typing while my stomach tightened. Someone laughed behind me. Golden kids coming to clean house. I checked my phone. A private encrypted message from my father. Unknown to anyone else. We never texted through regular channels. Handle it yourself. I won't intervene unless it becomes dangerous. No explanation. No warning. Just that. Which meant he hadn't sent anyone. Which meant someone was about to walk into my branch wearing my family name like armor. And I was going to have to let them. He arrived on a Monday. Designer suit. Watch worth more than my Corolla. Polished shoes that had never touched factory floors or call center carpets. Good morning, team, he said, standing in the middle of our cubicle grid like a politician visiting a disaster site. My name is Blake Dalton. Some of you may have heard of me. We hadn't. He smiled wider. I'm Richard Cole's son. And I'll be overseeing restructuring operations here. Think of me as the future of Summit Meridian. The room went silent. Someone actually stood up. Not out of respect. Out of reflex. He enjoyed that. Behind him was a thinner man with a tablet and a permanently eager expression. Trent Lewis, he announced quickly. Strategic Operations Support. What that meant became clear within days. Trent was a hallway microphone. He laughed too loud at Blake's jokes. He took notes when people whispered. He stared at screens that weren't his. I watched Blake carefully. His confidence was theatrical, overcompensating. He didn't ask about metrics. He didn't ask about churn rates. He asked about loyalty. How aligned do you all feel with corporate vision? He asked during our first culture meeting. No one answered. He clapped his hands once. That'll change. He set new culture rules by Wednesday. Stand when he enters. Mandatory verbal greeting. Morning, Blake. Timed bathroom breaks logged. Phones inspected for brand compliance. It was absurd, but fear makes absurd things stick, especially when someone claims to own the building. The first crack happened on a Thursday. Nate's phone buzzed during a call. He glanced at it. His face drained of color.
He muted the line.
My sister's in the ER, he whispered to me. He stepped away to answer. Blake appeared from nowhere. Is that a personal call? He asked loudly. Nate tried to explain. Blake didn't listen. He grabbed Nate's phone, dropped it, then stepped on it. The crack echoed in the cubicles. Company time is company money, Blake said calmly. Then he turned to Trent. Cut his performance bonus. Effective immediately. Nate stood frozen. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Not anger. Calculation. Because men like Blake don't test power randomly. They escalate. And they assume no one will stop them. He looked at the room. Everyone looked down. Then his eyes landed on me. And you, he said, pointing casually. Carter, right? Yes. You've got an interesting file. Transferred here quietly. No LinkedIn footprint. What's your story? Customer attention, I said evenly. He smiled. We'll see. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't just playing executive. He was looking for threats. And if someone had coached him to wear my name, then someone wanted a war. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed late, accessing internal audit logs, cross-checking authorization trails. Blake's credentials had been approved at a regional director level, not corporate. Someone inside the mid-tier structure had fast-tracked him. I downloaded copies, encrypted, time-stamped, sent to a compliance fail-safe I'd set up weeks earlier, just in case. They thought I was just another broke transplant. They thought Nate was disposable. They thought the floor would bow. And for now, I let them think that. Because the most dangerous move isn't announcing who you are. It's letting someone build a throne out of your name, and then pulling the ground out from under it. This was no longer about ego. It was about control. And I never needed applause to take control. I just needed patience. Blake didn't explode. He engineered humiliation. That's how I knew he'd done this before. The next morning, a printed memo sat on every desk. New culture alignment protocol. No Summit Meridian logo. No corporate header. Just Blake's name at the bottom. Rule 1. Stand when senior leadership enters the floor. Rule 2. Verbal greeting required. Rule 3. Personal calls equal immediate compensation review. Rule 4. Bathroom breaks limited to 6 minutes.
Tracked.
It was absurd. It was illegal. And it worked. Because people were tired. Because most of the team lived paycheck to paycheck. Because fear spreads faster than policy. Nate's phone sat in 2 cracked pieces on his desk. He couldn't afford to replace it yet.
He didn't complain.
He just worked quieter. Blake noticed that too. Predators always do. Friday afternoon, Blake called an alignment huddle. We stood. Every single one of us. Like trained animals. He paced slowly between the cubicles. I've noticed morale issues, he said smoothly. Negativity. Disloyalty. His eyes stopped on Nate. Especially from underperformers. Nate swallowed. My metrics are. Blake cut him off. Your metrics are what I say they are. He looked at Trent. Read it.
Trent tapped his tablet.
Nate Brooks, delayed client callbacks, insufficient enthusiasm during team meetings, resistance to cultural expectations. I almost laughed at the phrasing. Insufficient enthusiasm. Blake stepped closer to Nate. Your sister feeling better? He asked casually. Nate's face went white. You went through my phone? Nate whispered. Blake tilted his head. You brought personal instability into my workplace. That concerns me. Then he turned to the room. This is what lack of discipline looks like. And just like that, he announced a 30% reduction in Nate's variable pay. Effective immediately. No documentation. No HR. No authority. Just theater. And the room stayed silent. That was the worst part. Silence. I kept my face neutral. Inside, I was building a ledger. Every violation. Every illegal deduction. Every unauthorized pay adjustment. Time-stamped. Backed up.
Duplicated.
Sent to the encrypted compliance trigger. They thought this was dominance. It was documentation. By the second week, Blake changed tactics. Fear had worked. Now he wanted loyalty. Cash envelopes appeared on certain desks. Attitude bonuses. Small, but noticeable. 200 here. 300 there. Recipients were the ones who laughed at his jokes. The ones who stood fastest when he entered. Trent made sure everyone knew who got them. Isolation through reward.
Classic.
Then came the invitations. VIP lunch with leadership. Private mentoring sessions. And finally, mandatory team night at a country bar downtown. Attendance required. Failure to attend noted in performance review. It was framed as culture building. It was a compliance test. Nate told me he couldn't afford drinks. I'll just nurse a soda, he said. You're going, Blake overheard. Everyone's going. His eyes flicked toward me. And Carter.
Especially you.
Trent smirked. Later that afternoon, I heard my name near the break room. He's unstable, Trent whispered loudly to two associates. Blake pulled background notes. Violent temper in college. You didn't hear it from me. I'd never even been in a fight outside a controlled setting. But rumors don't need evidence. They need repetition. By Monday, I was the angry one. And Nate was the liability. Isolation complete. Exactly what Blake wanted. Divide. Label.
Control.
He thought he was moving pieces on a board. What he didn't realize was that I'd already mapped the board. And I was waiting for him to overplay. The bar was loud. Country music. Neon beer signs. Cheap wood floors sticky from spilled drinks. Blake arrived last. Of course. He scanned the room like he owned it. Drinks on leadership, he announced. Cheers followed. Not because they liked him. Because free alcohol makes people forget. Nate sat beside me at a high table. He looked uncomfortable. Trent was already laughing too hard at something Blake said. After 2 rounds, Blake climbed onto the small stage near the dartboards. Let's make this interesting, he said, holding up a bottle. He looked straight at me. Carter, you've got that brooding energy. Bet you can't finish this. The crowd turned. I didn't move. What's the prize? Someone shouted. Blake grinned. If he does, I restore Brooks' pay. Right now. The room shifted. Nate looked at me. I felt every eye watching. This wasn't about drinking. It was about obedience. About making me perform for scraps. I stood slowly. Walked toward the stage. Blake handed me the bottle. Close enough now, I could smell the cologne. Expensive. Manufactured confidence. You scared, he murmured quietly. No, I said. And I set the bottle back on the table. I don't negotiate dignity for wages. A few people blinked. Blake's smile twitched. Then maybe you're not team material. He grabbed the bottle again. Took a long swig. Then slammed it down hard enough to crack against the table edge. The music didn't stop. But the mood did. He leaned toward me, voice low and sharp. You think you're better than me? I didn't answer. That's when he swung. Not cleanly. Not skillfully. Just a drunk, angry arc with glass in his hand. He meant to scare. Maybe to cut. He never made contact. I stepped inside the swing, controlled his wrist, twisted. The bottle dropped. He stumbled. Momentum carried him backward off the stage platform. He hit the floor. Hard. The music cut out. Silence. For 3 seconds. Then someone near the back laughed. Not mockery. Recognition. Hey, that's the guy from that youth self-defense event last month. I froze. A bartender leaned forward. You taught that seminar at Oak Cliff Community Center, right? For teens. I'd volunteered under my real name. Minimal publicity. Didn't think anyone here would connect it. Blake looked up from the floor, red-faced, humiliated. Trent rushed forward. He assaulted management. Trent shouted.
Phones were already out.
Recording. The bartender shook his head. Management tried to hit him. Murmurs spread. Blake scrambled to his feet. This isn't over, he hissed at me. I believed him. Because men like him don't retreat. They escalate. And he still thought he had my name as protection. He had no idea what protection actually looked like. Monday would prove that. Blake didn't show up to the floor until 10:17 Monday morning.
Late.
Calculated. He wanted tension to build. I was already at my desk, reviewing weekend email logs and backing up 3 new compliance notes I'd added after the bar incident. Nate hadn't slept. I could see it in his eyes. They're going to spin it, he said quietly. I know, I replied. Blake walked in wearing a darker suit than usual. No greeting smile. No performance charm. Just controlled fury. We stood automatically. Even me. Not because I respected him. Because I wanted him comfortable. Trent followed, clutching a folder.
Paper.
That was interesting. Blake didn't bother with pleasantries. Corporate conducted a weekend review, he announced loudly. Disturbing findings. Corporate hadn't done anything. I would have known. Effective immediately, he continued. We are implementing restructuring measures. He looked straight at me. Evan Carter, terminated for violent misconduct against executive leadership. Then at Nate. Nate Brooks, terminated for insubordination and behavioral instability. The words hung in the air. People stared at their monitors. No one moved. Trent stepped forward and placed 2 sheets of paper on our desks. Termination notices. I didn't touch mine. Instead, I looked at the bottom. No corporate watermark. No HR signature. Just Blake Dalton's name.
Typed.
Not even countersigned by regional operations. He was bluffing.
Boldly.
Nate's hands shook. You can't just, he started. Security is on standby, Blake interrupted smoothly. You will collect personal belongings and exit. I stayed seated. Blake's jaw tightened. Did you not hear me? I did, I said calmly. And you should know those documents are invalid. A flicker.
Small. But there.
Trent jumped in. They're authorized at executive level. Then they'd have dual signatures. I replied evenly. And compliance registry codes. Blake's eyes sharpened. Are you a lawyer now, Carter? No, I said. I just read policy. Silence stretched. He wasn't used to resistance delivered without emotion. That unsettled him more than yelling would have. He pulled out his phone. Fine. If he wanted escalation, I'd let him initiate it. Security to floor 4, he said loudly. We have 2 hostile former employees refusing to vacate. Hostile. Interesting choice. Within minutes, 2 building security officers arrived. Not corporate security. Building contractors. Neutral. One of them recognized me from the community event. His expression shifted subtly. Everything all right? He asked. Blake stepped forward confidently. These 2 have been terminated and are refusing to leave. The guard looked at the paperwork. HR sign-off, he asked. Handled, Blake snapped. The guard examined the page. His eyebrows rose slightly. This doesn't look standard. Blake's composure cracked for half a second. It's executive-level authorization. Above your pay grade. I stood. Slowly. I'm not resisting, I said to the guards. But I'm not leaving without verified documentation from HR. Blake's nostrils flared. You don't get to make demands. I'm not making demands, I said. I'm protecting the company from wrongful termination liability. The words hit differently. Liability. The room shifted. People looked up. Trent stepped closer to Blake and whispered urgently. Blake waved him off. Remove them, he ordered. The guard didn't move. Sir, he said carefully, we need HR confirmation before physical removal. Blake grabbed his phone again, probably to call someone mid-level who had helped push his credentials through. He stepped away, speaking in harsh whispers. That's when my phone vibrated. Encrypted channel. Compliance, trigger activated. Auto-release executed. I didn't smile, but I felt the shift. 2 weeks earlier, I had sent a fully documented file to the company's anonymous compliance hotline. Every illegal pay adjustment. Every unauthorized policy. Audio clip from the bar incident. Copies of Blake's credential approval chain. I'd programmed it to auto-forward to regional HR, legal, and the internal audit committee if my employee status changed in the system. Blake had just processed my termination in the local branch portal. He had triggered his own audit. He didn't know it yet, but someone at headquarters did. His phone rang. Different ringtone. Not the one he'd been using. He glanced at the screen. Color drained. He stepped farther away to answer. I watched silently. Yes, he said tightly.
Pause.
His posture stiffened. I was restructuring proactively. Longer pause. His eyes flicked toward me. Then away. No, that's not accurate. Another pause. This one stretched. When he returned, his swagger was gone. Trent looked confused. Blake cleared his throat. Temporary pause, he muttered. Pending review. The entire floor heard it. Security stepped back. No one touched us. Then the elevator doors opened, and 2 people I recognized from corporate HR stepped out. Unannounced. No warning. They walked directly toward Blake. Mr. Dalton, one of them said evenly. We need to speak with you.
Now.
Blake tried to recover his tone. Of course. I was just addressing internal discipline. You'll address it upstairs, she replied. Not a request. A directive. Trent's face had gone pale. They escorted Blake toward the elevator. He turned once, glaring at me. There it was. The first crack of real fear. The doors closed. Silence swallowed the floor. No one spoke for a full 30 seconds. Then the HR rep turned toward us. Mr. Carter. Mr. Brooks. You are not terminated. Please resume your duties. We will be conducting interviews. Nate looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You knew, he whispered once HR stepped away. I prepared, I said. He stared. You're not just some guy. I held his gaze. I'm exactly who I've been. That was true, but not complete. Because this wasn't over. Blake wasn't removed. Not yet. He'd been warned. And men who build their identity on stolen power don't retreat quietly. They look for leverage. And if he couldn't control me through termination, he'd try something bigger. Blake came back 2 days later. That surprised me. I expected suspension. At minimum, temporary removal. Instead, corporate sent a carefully worded email. Operational leadership adjustments pending review. Which meant politics. Someone above him was protecting him. He walked onto the floor quieter this time. No applause. No theatrical entrance. But the smile returned.
Smaller.
Sharper. He didn't look at me. That told me everything. He'd been warned. Not removed. Which meant someone on the board didn't want him gone yet. Interesting. Very interesting. By Friday, the fear strategy was gone. Now it was rewards. Cash bonuses reappeared. Larger. $500 labeled Culture Excellence Incentive. Private calendar invites sent to select employees. Leadership exposure lunch. Everyone who accepted started avoiding eye contact with Nate.
And me.
Trent's whisper campaign intensified. He's connected to compliance. I overheard him say near the coffee machine. Corporate plant. Violent history. They're just covering it up. The narrative shifted. From dangerous to suspicious. Suspicion isolates more effectively than fear. Nate felt it immediately. 2 coworkers who used to eat lunch with us stopped showing up. His metrics suddenly dipped in the reporting dashboard. I checked backend logs after hours. Manual adjustments. Input from management override. Blake wasn't attacking openly anymore. He was starving. Slow suffocation instead of public execution. Classic pivot. Then came the email. Mandatory Team Appreciation Night. Saturday. Rustline Country Bar. Attendance required for performance review eligibility. That was retaliation disguised as bonding. Nate stared at the screen. If I don't go, I lose bonus eligibility again. You're going, I said. You too. Yes. He studied my face. You're not scared? No. That wasn't entirely true. I wasn't scared of Blake. I was concerned about who was backing him. Because someone had allowed unauthorized credential approval. Someone had stalled HR action. Someone with influence. Which meant Blake wasn't improvising alone. Saturday night, Rustline was louder than before. Blake didn't drink immediately this time. He observed. Measured. People were more cautious around him. That irritated him. Control addicts crave visible submission. So he escalated. Midway through the night, he tapped his glass with a fork. I've decided to restore Nate's pay, he announced. Murmurs spread. Nate blinked. Blake raised a hand. On one condition. He turned to me. Carter proves he's a team player. There it was again. Performance. Public obedience. What do you want? I asked evenly. Blake gestured toward the bar. A full bottle. No breaks. You finish it, Brooks' pay returns. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't fun anymore. It was coercion. I walked toward him slowly, took the bottle from the counter, held it, then set it back down. I don't exchange self-respect for fairness, I said quietly. Blake's jaw tightened. You're making this difficult. No, I replied. You are. Something snapped behind his eyes. He grabbed the bottle himself, took a long pull, then leaned close to me. You think compliance saves you, he whispered. Before I could answer, he swung again. Sloppier than last time. Angrier. I moved automatically.
Control wrist.
Shift weight. Redirect momentum. He stumbled sideways into a high table. The bottle slipped. Shattered.
Gasps.
Chairs scraping. But this time, it wasn't just bar noise. A small crowd had formed near the back. A makeshift banner hung on the wall. Local amateur fight night. I hadn't noticed before. A man near the ring stared at me. Hey, he said loudly. That's Evan Cole. My pulse didn't change. But Blake's did. The man stepped closer. You sponsored the Oak Cliff Youth Defense Program last quarter. You spoke at the fundraiser. Several heads turned. Someone pulled up the event page on their phone. There I was. Photo. Full name. Evan Cole. Blake froze. Trent's face drained completely. You, Blake started. But I didn't look at him. I looked at the man who recognized me. Please keep this quiet, I said calmly. Too late. Someone had already said it out loud. Cole. The room buzzed. As in Richard Cole? Blake's breathing turned uneven. He wasn't drunk anymore. He was calculating. But it was slow calculation. Desperate. You're lying, he said finally. I held his gaze.
No, I said.
And I didn't elaborate. That was worse. Because uncertainty spreads faster than proof. Within minutes, the mood shifted completely. Blake wasn't the golden heir anymore. He was the man who might have punched the real one. He left early. No speech. No dominance. Just retreat. Monday morning felt different. People didn't stand immediately when Blake walked in. Some didn't stand at all. Trent didn't make eye contact with anyone. By noon, HR requested another closed-door meeting. This time, they requested me specifically. Nate watched me walk toward the conference room. You're really not just some guy, he said quietly. I paused. I'm still your friend, I replied. That part mattered most. Because the war was about to change shape. Blake now knew. And men like him don't surrender when exposed. They look for leverage. They look for blood. And if he couldn't dominate through fear, he would try something permanent. The HR meeting lasted 43 minutes. I counted. 2 representatives. One from legal dialed in remotely. Blake wasn't present. They asked about policy violations, unauthorized compensation deductions, hostile conduct. I answered calmly. No dramatics. No identity reveal. When they asked how I knew so much about compliance structure, I said, I read the manual. Technically true. They ended with a statement that sounded neutral but wasn't. We're expanding the scope of review. That meant Blake was no longer being handled quietly. Someone higher was involved. When I stepped out, Nate was pretending to reorganize files he'd already alphabetized. Well, he asked. It's moving, I said. He studied me carefully. You're not scared of him?
No. Why?
I looked at him for a long second. Because he's lying. Nate exhaled slowly. That's not enough to survive people like him. I almost told him then. Almost. But timing is power. And timing wasn't right yet. By Wednesday, Blake changed strategy again. If intimidation and bribery didn't restore control, then chaos would. At 9:02 a.m., an email hit the entire floor. Subject: Structural realignment and workforce optimization. Corporate tone. Copied to regional leadership. Attachment included. A revised organizational chart. My name wasn't on it. Neither was Nate's. Below the chart, pending final HR confirmation. He hadn't fired us. He'd erased us. Preemptively. Psychological warfare. Phones started buzzing. People avoiding eye contact. Trent walked by my desk slowly, smirking. Sometimes restructuring happens fast, he whispered. I didn't respond. Instead, I logged into the internal directory. My employee ID was still active. But something else caught my attention. Blake's title had changed overnight. From regional operations manager to interim executive liaison. That wasn't a Dallas-level promotion. That was board-level positioning. Which meant someone was pushing him upward despite active investigation. That someone had power. And motive. I stepped into the stairwell and opened the encrypted channel to my father. No greeting. Just one line. Who authorized Dalton's liaison elevation? 3 minutes later, the reply came. No one from my office.
Pause.
Then a second message. Board member Howard Kessler advocated strongly.
Kessler.
Senior board member. Long history in aggressive acquisitions. Known for strategic shakeups. He'd always pushed for faster succession. For my father to prepare the next generation. A slow, cold realization settled in. Blake wasn't improvising ambition. He was being positioned. As a catalyst. As leverage. If he destabilized a branch. If he created internal conflict. If he could claim grassroots loyalty. That would justify executive intervention. And maybe even succession pressure. A family war inside the company would weaken my father's control. Kessler would step in as stabilizer. Board majority would shift. And the Cole name would fracture publicly. Blake wasn't just pretending to be my father's son. He was weaponizing the possibility. I typed one more message. Does Kessler know he's not your son? The response took longer.
Yes. That was all it said.
My jaw tightened slightly. So this wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. Manufactured conflict. The next attack came that afternoon. Security escorted Nate from the building. Not fired. Administrative hold, they said. Anonymous complaint. Allegations of threatening behavior. No details. No evidence shown.
Trent wouldn't look at me.
Blake watched from his glass-walled office. Satisfied. Divide the allies. Isolate the variable. Classic containment move. I didn't argue. I didn't escalate. Instead, I asked security one question. Was the complaint internal or external? They hesitated. Internal. Which meant documented. Which meant traceable. Which meant falsifiable.
Good.
Very good. That night, I drove somewhere I hadn't been in months. A small apartment complex 20 minutes north of downtown. I parked across the street. Waited. At 11:18 p.m., a black SUV pulled in. Blake stepped out. Not drunk. Not staggering. Focused. He didn't go into the main building. He walked to the rear entrance. Used a key. Private access. Interesting. I ran the plate earlier that week. Leased under a Shell LLC. Registered 3 months ago. A secret apartment. Not listed in his onboarding disclosure. which meant concealment, which meant leverage. I didn't approach, didn't photograph him entering.
I just logged the time.
Cross-referenced property registry, pulled LLC filings. The managing member traced back to a holding structure connected to Howard Kessler. Of course, this wasn't just sponsorship. It was staging. Blake had been placed in Dallas with housing, credentials, and narrative support. He wasn't random. He was selected. But why him? Why risk impersonation exposure? Unless there was a biological angle. I stared at the LLC paperwork on my laptop. Blake Dalton. Birth year aligned with a period before my parents' marriage. My chest tightened for the first time in weeks. I opened one more database. Restricted archive. Private family trust records. There it was. A sealed settlement. Dated 28 years ago. Confidential support agreement. Non-disclosure clause. No public acknowledgement. Name redacted. But timeline matched. I leaned back slowly. Blake wasn't a fraud. He was a secret. A secret my father had buried before building his public legacy. Kessler hadn't invented him. He had found him. And sharpened him. This wasn't corporate sabotage. It was blood. And blood complicates war. The next morning, Blake requested a private meeting with me. No witnesses. No Trent. Just us. He closed the door behind me. His expression was different. Less theatrical. More searching. You know, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. A long silence. You think that makes you untouchable? He asked. No, I said. It makes you reckless.
His jaw tightened.
You had everything, he said. I had responsibility. You had a name. And you're trying to wear it. His eyes flared. You don't even know what it's like growing up outside that house. There it was. Not denial. Resentment.
Real.
Which meant he believed he was owed something. And men who feel owed are dangerous. I didn't come here to fight you, he continued. Kessler says the board needs options. Kessler wants control, I said evenly. And you're his pressure point. He stepped closer. You could make this easy.
How?
Public acknowledgement. Shared succession track. We both win.
No.
We both lose. Because division at the top fractures stability below. And thousands of employees depend on that stability. This isn't a family reunion, I said calmly. It's a company. He laughed once. You sound just like him. I learned from him. His expression darkened. If you block this, he said quietly, I won't go quietly. I know. And I did. Because men shaped by secrecy and resentment don't settle for side roles. They escalate. And if he couldn't win through legitimacy, he would try exposure.
Public. Messy.
Explosive. The war was no longer about a branch office. It was about legacy. And one of us would walk out with the name intact. Blake moved first. He always did when cornered. Friday afternoon, an internal memo leaked to half the branch. Subject: Executive Succession Transparency Initiative. It referenced new generational leadership candidates and expanded coal representation. Expanded. Not replacement. Not support. Representation. Someone wanted the idea seeded before proof surfaced. Kessler wasn't subtle anymore. He was testing reactions. By Monday, whispers weren't about restructuring. They were about inheritance. About 2 sons. About board pressure. And for the first time since this began, Nate looked at me with something other than curiosity. He looked worried. You're in the middle of something bigger than us, he said quietly. Yes. Are we collateral?
No.
That answer wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Because collateral damage only happens when you move too late. And I was done waiting. The charity auction was already scheduled months earlier. Annual Summit Meridian Scholarship Gala. Public event. Press coverage. Board members attending. I'd funded a quiet scholarship program for frontline employee families through a blind trust. No branding. No headlines. Just tuition checks mailed directly. The trust listed my real name. But most branch-level employees never followed those filings. Blake hadn't either. Until now. The ballroom was polished glass and quiet power. Nate almost didn't come. "I don't belong here," he muttered as we walked inside. "You do," I said. He wore a borrowed suit. I wore one of my father's older cuts. Intentional. Not flashy. Not competitive. When we stepped past registration, the auction director froze for half a second, then smiled warmly. "Mr. Cole," she said, extending her hand. "Not Carter. Not mistaken.
Cole."
The room shifted. Blake was 10 feet away. So was Tara Quinn, my ex. She'd broken up with me 3 months before Dallas. Said I lacked ambition. Said I wasn't moving fast enough. She'd reappeared last month on Blake's arm. Status gravitates toward perceived power. The director continued smoothly. "We're so grateful for your continued scholarship sponsorship. The students are here tonight." Nate turned slowly toward me. His face went pale. Blake didn't move. He stared. Not confused. Not surprised. Calculating. Tara looked between us, realization dawning in fragments. "You didn't tell me," she whispered toward Blake. Blake didn't answer. Because there was nothing to say. The mask had fallen.
Publicly. Cleanly.
Without me raising my voice. I didn't make a speech. I didn't expose him. I didn't humiliate him theatrically. I just accepted acknowledgement. Shook hands. Congratulated scholarship recipients. Moved with quiet confidence. That was worse. Because power without performance feels permanent. Halfway through the evening, Blake cornered me near the silent auction display. "You set this up," he muttered. "No," I replied. "I've been doing this for years. You could have told me." "Why?" His jaw tightened. "You want me to look like a fraud. You did that yourself." Tara stepped closer. "Blake said his father didn't want publicity yet," she said slowly. I held her gaze. "My father doesn't need publicity." The truth landed heavily. For her. For Blake. For anyone within earshot. Monday morning, corporate acted. Not subtly. An emergency board vote was called. Kessler attempted to frame Blake as an unrecognized asset deserving formal integration. My father presented the compliance file, the unauthorized credential approvals, the illegal pay deductions, the secret department funded through a Kessler-connected LLC, the manipulation of branch metrics, and finally, the attempted staged succession narrative. It wasn't about blood. It was about governance. Blake wasn't removed because he existed. He was removed because he destabilized the company. By noon, HR walked him out. Trent followed 15 minutes later. No speeches. No applause. Just silence. Employees watched from cubicles as security escorted them to the elevator. Blake didn't look at me this time. He looked straight ahead. Rigid.
Contained.
Defeated. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I received an encrypted message from an unknown number. Wire transfer records attached. Personal account details.
Mine.
And a demand. Public acknowledgement of shared succession. Or the records go to financial press. Extortion. Calculated. Desperate. Blake wasn't finished. He'd stolen partial data during his liaison elevation. Enough to create scandal headlines. Not enough to prove wrongdoing, but enough to shake stock confidence. I forwarded the message to legal. And to my father. We didn't respond. Instead, we traced the routing. The transfer attempts linked back to the same LLC structure Kessler had used. Which meant Blake wasn't freelancing. He was being encouraged. Desperation from someone higher. That same week, federal compliance auditors opened an inquiry into Kessler's acquisition history. Triggered by internal whistle documentation. Not mine. Another board member's. Politics had shifted. The pressure point was now exposed. Blake sent one more message. "You're choosing him over blood." I replied once. "I'm choosing stability over ego." He didn't answer again. 3 days later, he was arrested. Not for impersonation. Not for extortion. For securities manipulation tied to the leaked restructuring memo. Kessler resigned before charges were formalized. Publicly, it was framed as governance reform. Privately, it was containment. Nate walked into my new office a month later. Not a cubicle. Not executive tower either. Regional operations lead. Earned. Transparent. I guess I should call you Mr. Cole now, he said carefully. No, I replied. You shouldn't. He studied the space. You knew the whole time. Yes. And you still covered my bus pass. I nodded. He swallowed. Why? Because loyalty isn't built from hierarchy. It's built from character. But I didn't say that. I just said, because you mattered before any of this did. He sat down slowly. So what now? Now we fix what he broke. And if more secrets surface, they will. I didn't destroy Blake. He destroyed himself trying to claim something he thought he was owed. Blood doesn't grant leadership. Character does. And if I ever forget that, then I don't deserve the name either. Blake's arrest didn't explode the way people think scandals do. There was no dramatic headline with my name in bold. No television trucks outside the building. It was quieter than that. A press release about security's irregularities. A resignation letter from Howard Kessler citing personal reasons. An internal email about renewed commitment to governance. But inside Summit Meridian, everyone knew, because power shifts have a temperature, and the building felt different, lighter, cautious, watching me. I didn't move into the executive tower. I refused it. Instead, I accepted a formal promotion to Regional Operations Director for Texas. Transparent.
Documented.
Merit-based. No hidden ladder. No accelerated succession announcement. The board wanted a public statement positioning me as emerging leadership. I declined. Not yet. Because I'd just watched what happens when succession becomes theater. And I wouldn't repeat that mistake. Nate's suspension was reversed with full pay restoration. The anonymous complaint traced back to a falsified internal submission routed through Trent's credentials. Criminal?
No.
Career ending?
Yes.
Trent cooperated with investigators to reduce his exposure. He provided message threads, audio notes, proof that Kessler's office had advised Blake on narrative framing, including one line that stuck with me. Conflict accelerates transition. They had wanted a fracture. They wanted headlines about a disputed heir. Board panic. Stock dip. Emergency stabilization vote. And in chaos, power shifts. Blake wasn't just angry. He was recruited, shaped, encouraged to believe he deserved immediate recognition. Maybe he did deserve acknowledgement.
But not like that.
Not weaponized. 3 weeks after the arrest, Blake requested a meeting. Through legal, monitored, neutral location. I agreed. Not because I owed him. Because unfinished conversations fester. He looked different, less polished. No designer suit. No performance posture. Just tired. You won, he said flatly. This wasn't a competition, I replied. He let out a quiet laugh. It always was. Silence settled between us. For the first time, there were no spectators. No board. No employees. No Trent. Just two men connected by a secret neither of us chose. They told me you had everything handed to you, he said eventually. They told me I'd been erased. I held his gaze. Did they tell you about the expectations? I asked. The surveillance? The constant proving. He didn't answer. They told me you'd reject me, he continued. That you'd protect the brand over blood. They were wrong, I said calmly. His eyes flickered. I didn't reject you, I added. I rejected instability. His jaw tightened. You think I'm unstable. I think you were used. That landed. Harder than accusation. Used men don't like admitting it. Because it means they weren't in control. They promised recognition, he said quietly. They promised leverage. They promised you'd hesitate if things went public. I nodded once. I didn't hesitate. No, he admitted. You didn't. Another silence. This one less hostile. I'm not asking for a job, he said finally. Good. I'm asking for the truth. So, I gave it to him. Yes, I said. You are Richard Cole's son. No dramatics. No softness. Just fact. He closed his eyes briefly. That's all I needed to hear, he said. No, I replied. It's not. He looked up. You need to decide who you are without someone weaponizing you. His expression hardened slightly. You think I can just walk away? Yes. From what? From resentment.
He almost smiled at that.
Easy for you to say. Not as easy as you think. We didn't reconcile.
We didn't shake hands.
But when he left, he wasn't looking for leverage anymore. He was looking for direction. That mattered. Back at the office, changes rolled out quietly. Compensation adjustments were audited across all branches. Anonymous complaint systems were redesigned to prevent manipulation. Mid-level credential approvals required cross-department validation. And I reinstated something Blake had mocked. Open-door reporting. No retaliation. No public humiliation. Metrics mattered.
But so did dignity.
Nate moved into a senior analyst role within 6 months. Earned. Transparent. He never asked for special treatment. He never treated me differently. Except once. Late one evening, after most of the floor had cleared, he stood in my doorway. You could have stepped in day one, he said. Yes. Why didn't you? Because leadership isn't about crushing someone the moment they threaten you. It's about exposing the structure that allowed them to threaten you. But I answered more simply. Because I needed to see who people became under pressure. And you didn't fold. He nodded slowly. I was scared. I know. He hesitated. Were you? I thought about that. About the first rumor. The bar fight. The secret apartment. The extortion message. Yes, I said finally. But fear doesn't get to decide. He smiled slightly. Good. Then he left. The board eventually formalized my succession track. Not loudly. Not theatrically.
Structured.
Measured. Transparent. Blake's name was not included. But neither was it erased. A private family acknowledgement occurred months later. No press. No shareholders. Just truth. Some wounds don't need headlines. They need boundaries. People assume power is loud. It isn't. It's patient. It documents. It waits. It moves once. And when it does, it doesn't need to scream. I didn't destroy Blake. I didn't expose him publicly. I didn't humiliate him in front of cameras. He did that himself when he chose ego over stability. All I did was refuse to kneel to someone wearing my name like a costume. And, in the end, that was enough.